Welcome everyone. Our topic today is living with the end in mind. I've had to really contain my enthusiasm because this topic is so valuable, and I'm just so thrilled to have the opportunity to explore it with you. But before we begin, I'd like to do a couple things. One, we'll first take refuge together, and in the Buddhist tradition, taking refuge is it really precedes all of our virtuous or spiritual practices and helps in the process of our awakening, because we're really going to refuge. We're going for safety in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which is the doctor, the medicine, and the nurse. And there's lots of teachings on that, but we'll go ahead and say the refuge prayer. And those of you who don't know it, you can listen and just kind of rest in your heart, and we'll begin. In order to obtain perfect enlightenment, I vow from now on to go for refuge to the Guru and 3 precious gems, and not abandon sentient beings. I will practice the 6 perfections. In order to obtain perfect enlightenment, I vow from now on to go for refuge to the Guru and 3 precious gems, and not abandon sentient beings. I will practice the 6 perfections. In order to obtain perfect enlightenment, I vow from now on to go for refuge to the Guru and 3 precious gems, and not abandon sentient beings. I will practice the 6 perfections. And then we'll just take a few moments in silence, and I just would like to invite you to find your breath and feel yourself really settling into the present moment. And I invite you to set your intention for being here today. It's really wonderful that we have the karma to come together, and I pray that whatever each one of you needs to hear today, that you'll receive that. And so we'll just open that to, invite you to open that to your own, whatever intention you set. Okay, so my name is Nakmo Chuni, and I am a teacher in training, a student of Domo Geshe Rinpoche, and a member of the White Conch Dharma Center. And I'm really happy to see you all today and eager to begin. So the topic is living with the end in mind, and this is a topic that I felt would be really appropriate for this Practical Buddhist Wisdom series, because it really speaks to, in many ways, about how we can be more alive, how we can become more alive, and how we can really make good use of this life that we have. I'm a professor. I teach a grief course. I do a lot of work and research in the area of end-of-life care. And I see what happens to a lot of people at the end of their lives, and that's really inspired me to think more deeply about the value of living with the end in mind. And so that was part of my motivation. And many philosophers and spiritual traditions have considered it an act of wisdom to consciously contemplate and prepare for death throughout life. Socrates said we should always be occupied in the practice of dying. Plato told his students, practice dying. Christian monks in medieval Europe would practice a ritual of constantly reminding one another. They would whisper in each other's ear, memento mori, remember death. And this was a means of considering the vanity of earthly life and the transient nature of all earthly goods and pursuits. And it was really an important part of the Christian practice in medieval Europe. The Buddha said, of all the footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Of all meditations, that on death is supreme. And there's a psalmist prayer, teach us to number our days that we may enter the heart of wisdom. Okay. So from many different perspectives, people have been encouraged through the ages to remember death, to remember that their days are numbered, right? And our society in general, we're not really encouraged to do this as Westerners, are we? What are some of the messages we receive about death in our society? What have we learned about it? If we're not taught to do this, what do we learn?
Something to be feared.
Yeah, it's really scary. Something that it's fearful. And if you look at the images, right, the children are exposed to, skeletons and crossbones, and it's always comes with this scary kind of connotation. And in movies, it's often portrayed in a very fearful way. Thank you. How else?
What troubles me is, when someone's dead, the process of embalming and putting in all these chemicals that prevent decay, and the extensive money spent on caskets and securing your burial plot years in advance. And it's all this, it kind of reminds me of the Egyptian tradition of embalming mummies and things.
Yes.
Rather than just accepting that the impermanence and letting things transition.
Yeah, it's a really good insight that we take a body and there's no longer a life force in that body, and we try to preserve it as if there is, right? We try to maintain its shape and form as if it is, and as if we could, right? So there's a message we're receiving about that. Dama?
Yeah, I was going to say that there's this maybe subconscious concept that death is something to be conquered, that when someone dies, it's a failure to overcome death.
Yeah, and the pressure that people feel from healthcare providers or from family to live at all costs. And that death is viewed as a failure in a lot of ways. And people don't want to accept responsibility for that. I've known physicians who would transfer people off of their unit because they knew they were going to die and they didn't want the numbers to look bad on their unit, right? And so it's something to be avoided, something to be prevented at all costs. We tend to be really shocked when it happens. How could this happen? Or if we're told we have a terminal illness, oh my gosh, how could this happen to me? And there could be a lot of anger and rage about that it's something that's not supposed to happen, right? And so we get these messages, and it affects how we think about this, and we'll kind of see how this has affected us in our own contemplations today. And of course, our whole technological healthcare system kind of keep people alive as long as possible. And we know that I've worked with a lot of elders. They've had, no quality of life, no capacity to communicate. They're basically kept alive for a very long time on machines, that their body is kept alive, but they're really not, living. So from a Buddhist perspective, ignoring or not remembering death is a door to a lot of trouble. From a Buddhist perspective, this will cause us a lot of problems in life. So why might that be? Like, how would this avoidance cause us problems?
When you put something off, more energy builds up around it when it comes time to actually face it. So avoidance exaggerates the present experience.
So it can contribute to this sense of shock and disbelief and the intensity of learning that you're going to die when the time comes, right? So there you are. You've never really thought about it before. You've kind of avoided it, and there you are. So you're absolutely right. It's really going to intensify that reaction. And then we could talk about how that might cause other problems, right? What else?
So if you're now considering that you might postpone certain things that you really wanted to do or finish, and then when the time comes, you're not prepared, or you have regret. You haven't resolved relationship conflicts or whatever.
Yeah, the sense of, I'm just going to live forever, and so we don't take care of things that we need to do, and we may live our life recklessly. We know a lot of young people. We know a young person who recently died in a crash, and a lot of young people feel like they're impervious to death, and they engage in a lot of high-risk behavior. They don't think it's going to happen to them, and so it might affect how you behave, how you live your life. It might affect what you say and do, because you're not really mindful that this could happen. Any other thoughts? Hello. Welcome. Yeah.
Similar to what you just said, but your motivations can be more directed towards things that don't really matter as much, like the money, the status, the looks, the things of the world that will pass away anyways, just over the course of your life.
Yeah, so the kinds of things you focus on that may not really bring value, you might discover you've wasted a lot of time, a lot of precious time. And a lot of people talk about that. That's one of the things we'll talk about, the regrets that people have at the end of life. So from a Buddhist perspective, too, we get really lost in samsara. We talk about samsara as the nature of the suffering state that we're all in. We're in the realm, the earthly realm, in samsara, and we go round and round and round until we awaken. And by not remembering death, we're just seeking pleasure, seeking happiness, and it really allows our worldly desires to grow. So awareness of the truth of impermanence is actually one of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. So this is a traditional teaching in Buddhism of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind away from samsara so that we don't waste our precious life. So there's 4 thoughts I just wanted to mention briefly. The first is that life is precious. So that's one thing we want to understand really deeply, that in fact, Rinpoche has said that if we do not understand that human life is so very precious, that it's actually quite difficult to obtain a human life, and it's easily lost, that we can easily waste our entire life. And just having a human life doesn't make it precious. That's why these contemplations become really important. Many people in this world are just trying to survive. They have hellacious lives. and they're just trying to survive. Well, how successful are you going to be at that? Not very, right? Because you can't survive forever, right? But what makes this life precious is for those of us who live in a country where we're free to practice spirituality, we're not oppressed in how we go about practicing our spirituality, having all of our human sense faculties so we can see, we can read teachings, we can come to teachings, hear, observe, take it in. Being born where spiritual teachings have been taught. There are many places in the world where people have no exposure to learning about how they actually can pursue authentic happiness. They're really trapped in a very limited exposure to what could actually free them from the suffering state. And also what makes it precious is having some interest in the teaching. So you all are here. You have some interest. Something drew you here. So, in many ways, we could look at this and ask ourselves, okay, so do I live in a country where I'm free to practice spirituality? Do I have all my sense faculties? Am I born where spiritual teachings have been taught? And do I have an interest? So from the perspective of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, a human life with the causes and conditions that allow us to be able to study, practice, meditate, gain spiritual realizations, cultivate virtue, is truly precious, and practicing in this way can make our life really meaningful. So the second thought that turns the mind away from samsara is this thought that everything is impermanent. Everything. Every molecule of phenomena is impermanent. Okay? Our human existence is not going to last. We prepare to live forever. We make plans for, when I retire, I'm gonna have travel the world. I'm just gonna have a great time. I tell you, I've worked with a lot of elders. They make all these plans. They retire and they're diagnosed with a very serious illness, and there's no traveling. That wasn't anything they planned for. We don't plan for the end of our life. We plan for all the fun things we want to do, right? But there's no guarantee that that's going to actually happen. This life in the Buddhist teachings, we talk about this life is like a bubble. Pop. So studying impermanence helps us not to fool ourselves. We know death can come at any time without any warning. But we don't really think of this. There's in the Hindu epic Mahabharata, the sage Yudhishthira is asked, of all the things in life, what is the most wondrous? And Yudhishthira responds, of all the things in life that are the most amazing, the most wondrous, it is that man, women can see death all around them, and they never think it's going to happen to them. But we know that, so the Buddhist, Patrul Rinpoche kind of condensed some of the teachings of the Buddha. And Patrul Rinpoche was a famous yogi and saint in Tibet. And he said, whatever is born is impermanent and is bound to die. Whatever is stored, now we look in our pantry, whatever is stored is impermanent and is bound to run out. Whatever is joined, whatever comes together, this table, okay? Whatever comes together, whatever is joined is impermanent and is bound to come apart. Whatever is built, beautiful building, is impermanent and is bound to collapse. Whatever grows up is impermanent and is bound to fall down. There's not one thing that is permanent in this world. Nothing. Everything comes together. You think about how did I get here? Well, mom and dad came together, right? Sperm and the egg came together. I'm made up of lots of parts. Right? There's no way I can be permanent. I have to come apart, right? I will eventually decay. The Buddha said, anything that is created is the composition of many things, and came about as a result of many conditions. Anything that is created is impermanent. And he said, of all the contemplations, that of impermanence is the deepest and most supreme. Now you know why I'm so excited to talk about this with you all. The third thought that turns the mind is the thought that karma and its consequences follow us everywhere. There's no escaping it. So karma is the law of cause and effect, right? You throw a rock at the window, what happens to the window, right? My action has a direct effect. All of our actions, body, speech, and mind, have an effect. This is an indisputable fact. There's nothing, there's we can't really contradict that. If I say something hurtful to you, that affects you. And it affects me. Right? And the quality of our life and our future lives is totally determined by these actions. Tsokmi Rinpoche says that our thoughts, feelings, speech, and action, virtuous or non-virtuous, create the intricate patterns of our life experience. We ourselves cause our own happiness or our own suffering. Just like if we were to plant corn in the garden, we will grow corn, and there's no way we can turn that into wheat or rice or anything else. Whatever we grow through our actions of body, speech, and mind will grow into something related to that, will have an effect related to that. And when death comes, we take those karmic imprints, those seeds with us. So there's a lot of things we can't take with us, right? I always used to say to myself, so I'm a professor, and I used to say, so I might be disappointed that I didn't get a paper published, and I'd say, now, if I were on my deathbed, would this really matter? Would it really matter if this paper were published? Probably not. But how I react to this disappointment will matter. That I will take with me. And that I will grow in my mind. And that I will cultivate. So when we understand this really deeply, it really changes us. So it's something else worth contemplating. And then the fourth thought that turns the mind concerns the shortcomings of samsara. So samsara, worldly life and worldly pursuits can't really bring us true happiness. Rinpoche has said that if something is a source of true happiness, the more of it you get, the happier you will be, right? And so I often use this example of chocolate cake. It's like, oh, so exciting. Oh, there's a cake in the other room, can't wait to have it. And, you have your piece of cake. And sometimes you cut a slice that's a little too big, right? What happens? Even if it's just a little too big, you're like, oh, you start to have some regret. You know, and if you go back and have a second piece, you know, you might even start to feel ill. So we know that can't be a true source of happiness, right? And so all the comforts of life, our home, our good friends, wealth, all of that, it actually can't help us at the time of death. All of those things are not things that we can take with us into future lives. In fact, we all will die alone. There's no one that can do it for us. It's a very intimate, private process. And all that we spend a lot of time in samsara gathering or trying to get, we can't take with us. So when we think really deeply about that, we think, well, if that's not going to help us, what will? And then the practice of Dharma and living a virtuous life and cultivating those states of mind that actually will bring us greater and greater happiness, then, you know, that becomes worthwhile. So from a Buddhist perspective, there are substantial and essential benefits of deeply understanding that we're going to die and that we take time to contemplate that. The goal of Buddhism is to improve the basis of our being and to learn to love others more deeply, more fully, without grasping and attachment. The goal is to awaken. And we contemplate our mortality and the changeable and impermanent nature of everything to keep us on track. There's nothing like facing death to keep the mind focused on what's truly important. I've known so many people. You know, they live lives of working to establish their reputation and be famous and well known and well respected. And they suffer so much when others disrespect them or they don't get what they want. And then they're diagnosed with a terminal illness. And they're just like startled, right? And all those things that they pursued and they thought were so important, it's like they're nothing in the face of death. And it changes people. It changes how people think. But we don't have to wait till we're diagnosed with a terminal illness. We all are going to die. We don't know when. And when we truly understand that death can come at any time, not intellectually, because we can all sit here and go, yeah, I'm going to die, I know that. Shanice said that, so it's going to happen. No. But to really understand it from the heart, we will innately know what to do with the rest of our life. And also, you know, it's not just, I think about not just our own life. I had something I wanted to share. I hope it's in here. Oh, yeah. If we were to know that when we're with someone, imagine you're having a meeting with someone. And if you were to know that you would be the last person to touch that individual's life, that when they walk away from you, that they're going to die, how would that change how you relate to them, how you talk to them, what you say to them? We always told our children, I've had a lot of people in my life die suddenly. My first memory was the death of my baby sister. I was 15 or 17 months old. She was 3 months old. Died like that. Father died in a crash. I learned this great gift that death can come at any time. No warning, no preparation. And it has affected me in how I am in relationship. And we, from the time our children were very young, we would, show them the leaves on the trees and talk about impermanence. Oh yeah, look at the leaves are falling, It's time for them to fall. All things change. They're going to, decompose. We had a neighbor that died when our son was he like 2 or 3? He was really young. And, our son knew this guy, really liked him. And, a lot of people were like, oh, what are you going to say? And, we were just like, great opportunity to teach him about death. This is awesome. I know from my own experience, like when my baby sister died, I wasn't told anything. I was very confused. I was looking for her all the time. Didn't participate in the funeral and nothing. 6 months later, we went to my grandmother's house, and I ran in the house. I thought we left her there. I'm running around, and she's like, "What are you looking for?" I was looking for Barbara. So this was a wonderful opportunity to teach him about death. When we go and see, so he's dead. He's not going to come back. He hit his head, and he died. And this is what you'll see when we go to the funeral. And the body will be cold because the life force isn't in it anymore to warm it. That's what makes the body warm. So all these different ways of talking with children about death are so important, and they're great opportunities for parents. But a lot of parents don't. They're afraid it will hurt their children. But denying them these opportunities to learn this truth hurts children. It's very confusing. I wanted to share with you this poem. Roger Houston, he wrote this poem it was published in Shambhala Sun in March of 2013. And this is about that idea of if you knew you were the last one to touch someone's life. What if you knew you'd be the last to touch someone? If you were taking tickets, for example, at the theater, tearing them, giving back the ragged stubs, you might take care to touch that palm. Brush your fingertips along the lifeline's crease. When a man pulls his wheeled suitcase too slowly through the airport, when the car in front of me doesn't signal, when the clerk at the pharmacy won't say thank you, I don't remember they're going to die. A friend told me she'd been with her aunt. They just had lunch, and the waiter, a young gay man with plum black eyes, joked as he served the coffee, kissed her aunt's powdered cheek when they left. Then they walked half a block, and her aunt dropped dead on the sidewalk. How close does the dragon's spume have to come? How wide does the crack in heaven have to split? What would people look like if you could see them as they are? Soaked in honey, stung and swollen, reckless, pinned against time. Isn't that beautiful? But even that, just imagine how different we might live. How different our relationships might be if we remembered. Death makes us realize how precious every moment is. We can ask ourselves, will what I'm doing further my development, or will I be wasting my time? Steve, is it Steve Jobs or Steve Jobs? Jobs, okay. He gave a graduation speech at a university recently, And he said something very interesting related to this. He said, remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. Oh, that's pretty cool advice for college graduates, don't you think? Yeah. There's a meditation practice that Amy Miller wrote in a book called Buddhism in a Nutshell, which is a really nice little book if you're interested. And she put forth this meditation, and she said, this meditation might seem kind of shocking to people, and you might be really nervous about doing it because it will invite you to think about death every day. But she says, I promise you, no one has ever died from doing this meditation. Okay? So I'm just going to share this with you, and you can think about whether this might be something you would want to integrate into a daily practice. She said, every morning, as you begin to wake up, slowly become aware of your surroundings. And at this point, reflect, I'm still alive. I didn't die in the night. How wonderful. You put a little note next to your bed to help you remember. And then think, I will die today, this evening perhaps. This very day may be my very last. And she said you must feel it as much as possible. I get one more day. I'm still alive. This is fantastic. I have one more day to practice and to live a life that is as meaningful as possible. And she said when problems arise, we tend to get so caught up in them. These little things that seem so important. We make a big deal out of them. However, people who know they're going to die are less concerned about a lot of these things. It seemed trivial. If I'm going to die today, is it really that important that I gossip about the neighbors or my colleagues? Is that really a good use of my time? If I'm going to die today, how much television do I really want to watch? And she said that a benefit of this practice is that when something does suddenly happen to you and you find yourself dying, you aren't quite so shocked. You'll be a little more prepared, kind of, what Tashi Norber was talking about before. And a beautiful example of this is Gandhi. He practiced, all his life he practiced. And he repeated the mantra of God, Ram, Ram. And he had said in a speech given 9 months before he was assassinated, even if I am killed, I will not give up repeating the name of Ram, which, means the same as God. And when he was shot 3 times. And as he was falling to the ground, he was practicing Ram, Ram. How wonderful to be that prepared. And I know in our tradition, we've been told that when we're dying, we want to call upon our guru. Very important. An incredible protection. And it's going to be really hard to do that if we're not practicing all along. Because we're just too shocked, we're too consumed, we're reacting to what's happening, right? But he had practiced every day to be fully alive, fully engaged in his practice, and he was ready. What a wonderful life. Okay? And if we spend our entire life forgetting death, then when we're faced with it, it will be too late to practice. And there's a wonderful quote by Chagdud Tulku Rinpoche. He said of death, "When you have to go to the bathroom, it's too late to build a latrine." Okay? And another benefit of remembering death is that it minimizes regrets, and this is something I think you mentioned earlier. And there's a book written by hospice nurses a hospice nurse, Bonnie Ware, I believe. And she, worked with people who were dying, and over the years of her practice, she realized that there were regrets that were commonly coming up in what people were sharing. And she condensed them into 5 regrets. And so I'd like to share those with you and just share a few thoughts about kind of the implications and how this might relate to the Buddhist teachings. So the first one, regret, is that people say, "I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life others expected of me." And how many young people I know who really struggle because they feel pressure to do, what their parents want them to do. Or I know in my own work world how many of us work in a way that there's expectations placed on us from others, what they hope you'll accomplish in your job or whatever it is. And we're often wrapped up in the so-called worldly concerns. We've done another teaching here on this. I think it's called Living a Meaningful Life. But we talked about the 8 worldly concerns, and they're wanting praise and a good reputation. So this is what many people are trying to accomplish. Not wanting to be criticized or blamed, wanting what we want, being unhappy when we don't get what we want, wanting pleasure, and not wanting pain. But what we want to do through our spiritual practice is cultivate that degree of integrity and confidence based on our own wisdom of what is good, what is kind, and sticking to it regardless of what others think and what others want. So I found myself in situations where people were misbehaving or gossiping or whatever it was, and I would stand up and say, I'm sorry, but I just don't think we can have this conversation. And being able to do that, even it's with superiors or, colleagues, whatever, that enough within yourself what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do based on higher ethics, higher standards that aren't just worldly, right? So that our self-worth does not need to be based on fleeting concerns of reputation, but rather on good qualities that we're developing in our own mind. Kindness, compassion, wisdom. And these are the qualities that are going to make us feel really good about ourselves, and also that are going to help us die with more peace in our mind. Contemplating death awareness, we think about what would it be like to lose everything? Even our body. It can have a dramatic effect on our mind. We can imagine losing one thing at a time. But what will really protect us from pain aren't these ordinary things we pursue. It's the development we've done for our mind. The second regret is, I wish I didn't work so hard. How many people at the end of the day say, I wish I had spent more time in the office, right? Lying on their deathbed? Not many. right? What we are pursuing through our work, we have to think about what are we doing, why are we doing it? And the motivation for the work that we do. Maybe we bring a motivation of bodhicitta to our work, right? Maybe we have a job because we need to pay our bills, but we still have a choice about the motivation we bring to that work that can make it more meaningful. Do we work to have more status? Do we work to, make enough money that we can go on retreats and do our spiritual practices? Do we work to help others and bring happiness and freedom to others? What is our motivation? And we can bring that bodhicitta motivation to everything we do. And I think, Teikshin, you'll be talking about this next month, is that right? So this will be a great topic.
Let's give a little preview and say what bodhicitta is.
Bodhicitta, the wish to attain enlightenment so that we become capable of freeing all living beings from suffering. Because we're not the only ones suffering. Our precious mother, our children, everyone we know, on the roller coaster of life, the ups and downs, they too will die. Will they die with regret? How are they living their life? How are they suffering? And in Buddhism, we say that all living beings have been our mother. We've gone around and around and around, so we're really, really intimately connected to all living beings. And do we want to awaken for ourselves alone and leave them suffering in samsara, lifetime after lifetime? No. So we cultivate this strong wish that helps us become more capable of being a benefit being a healing presence in this world. A lot of us, we want to change the world. We want to make it better, right? So we might get out and do some activism. It doesn't work like that. We have to transform our mind. And one by one. But this bodhicitta wish is profound. You practice beyond your capacity. You experience a lot more joy in life. This is a true source of happiness. The more bodhicitta you have alive in your mind stream, happier, 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 happier. Incredible. His holiness, that's his practice. He doesn't get tired from his work. He's tireless. The third regret, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. How often do we become irritated with others, right? Or we might hold a grudge, feel anger towards someone, and we might stuff it inside, and we let it brew, and then we develop these illnesses. I knew a grief therapist who said if the eyes don't tear, the organs will weep. And that there's this corresponding effect of these negative states of mind in our physiological body. And so many people develop illnesses related to bitterness and resentment from suppressing their feelings. My mother-in-law was married to a man for many years who was not very kind to her. And I would have this experience where I'd go and visit and he would start to say very unkind things to her. And I would get up from the dining room table and walk out of the house. And she would always just sit and just make nice. And she would always say to me, just make nice. And I said, I'm sorry, but I can't tolerate just sitting there making nice when I know he's being disrespectful and unkind to you. And if that's your choice, that's your choice. And she eventually left him after many, many, many years. And she regretted, deeply, deeply regretted, not having, the courage to say what needed to be said, even for his well-being. we let other people misbehave, I mean, the goal isn't just to make other people feel bad, but to say, you're misbehaving. This is not right. It's not kind. You're hurting yourself. You're hurting me. Stop it. So, we have to be careful. The idea is not just to express our anger and rage at others, because that we can regret too, right? So we have to be really skillful, and it's, figuring out how to overcome these feelings, how to change our minds so that these negative states of mind don't arise. That's part of the practice. That becomes really important. The other regret is I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And this really speaks to the importance of our relationships, the quality of our relationships. If we spend, a lot of time, pursuing money and getting involved in our work and all that, and we neglect our relationships, if we're suddenly on our deathbed, we might regret that. And Rinpoche has said, we're here for two primary reasons. All humans on this planet are here for two reasons. One is to learn the true nature of compassion, and two is to learn how to get along with others. So she said, if we're not involved in these two things, we're probably wasting our time. And so when people are on their deathbed, these things come up. What have I done in my relationships? I haven't really tended to them. I haven't brought healing where they needed to be healing. I've wasted, I've ignored people that needed me, or that, there was something there we were working on. So that's another important thing. And then I wish I had let myself be happier. And many people don't realize until they're faced with their death that they actually have a choice. We actually have a choice in our perceptions and in our happiness. And Rinpoche has given some wonderful teachings about, cultivating a mind of satisfaction. And again, it's part of our practice. Okay, so are there any questions or comments so far about any of this? Okay. I'd like to share with you the 9-point death meditation. This is an analytic meditation that is traditionally practiced in Tibetan Buddhism, and a lot of this is similar to a lot of the issues we've been talking about, but I wanted to present it anyway. So it's a traditional approach for gaining a realization about death, and it involves contemplating these 3 essential points that have 3 points within them. But the first point is one we've been talking about, that death is certain. Okay? Every living being dies. No one escapes. Can't be avoided. The wealthiest beings on the planet, they too will die. The greatest saints, the Buddha died. That was his last teaching to his students. He invited them to watch, and he laid on his side, and he taught them about death. And they didn't want him to go. Oh, no, don't leave us, don't leave us. But this was an important teaching they needed to understand. That no matter what your attainments, the physical body will perish, and your mind stream will depart, and so every living being dies. And part of this death is certain is also to think about how every breath we have brings us one breath closer to our death. We can't add a single second beyond what our death is. We can't control that. And if we think about how much time do we spend, we probably spend a third of our life sleeping, right? How much time do we spend preparing food, eating food, working? All those breaths, are they well spent? No. Watching TV, surfing the net. When we're young, we'll say, oh, I'll have time later, After I retire, then I'll practice. But, when we wait till we're old, it may be too late. We may not live that long. We don't know. We don't know when we'll die. So death is certain. The second major point is that the time of death is uncertain. There's no guarantee we're going to live a long life. I have known people who went to bed at night and didn't wake up in the morning. I had an experience last year where I woke up in the middle of the night and I was in excruciating pain. And I thought, I'm going to die. I could have died. Never have the opportunity to see my dear friends again. There's no guarantee we'll live a long life. I had a brother who died at the age of 16. And I'm sure when he was born, his mother thought, oh, my child, he'll live a long life. So painful for parents to lose their children. It's unbearable. And yet it happens all the time. Happens a lot. We don't know. Part of this contemplation on how the time of death is uncertain is to think about all the ways we could die. Yeah, we feel a little uncomfortable, like, really, do we really want to think about that? But why might we? These Buddhist teachings are meant to really turn our mind toward something more authentic. So what value might come from thinking about that?
To avoid bungee jumping.
Avoid bungee jumping, yeah. So then we think, oh, well, I'll just avoid all the causes of death, right? But then what happens? Can we avoid all the causes of death? Mm-hmm.
Just reminds you that it could come at any time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So accidents, natural disasters. We always think, oh, they're going to happen over there. The natural disasters, they happen in other countries, right? I know people who've lost family members in tornadoes and, natural disasters not too far from here. Mm-hmm.
This has been very kind of timely in my life because last week when I was driving back to Lotus Lake, a deer, I was totally unprepared that this deer was just suddenly in front of the car. And I slammed on the brakes, and going 60 miles an hour down to 20, and just like from here to the altar, that's as far as I was that close. And it really was like, physiologically, my system was preparing for
Yeah.
the shock of the impact, and I could die. And afterwards I contemplated, oh my God, I've got to get a will. I've got to do something. I have to be prepared.
Yeah.
If this happens, I'm not. I suddenly was aware. I'm not prepared for my loved ones and everyone else.
Yeah.
And and it's still like, okay, I have to do that sometime. I got to do it,
Yeah.
It seems like you almost have to get into this it's really going to happen.
Right.
Feeling to overcome your complete, well, that won't happen again, I'll be okay, and I'll be, but it's,
Thank you for sharing that. So I don't know if you all could hear, but Lakwa was saying that she had an experience driving up north and came upon a deer suddenly and had to slam on the brakes, and her whole system was actually alerted and preparing for the fact of death in that moment, and how startling that was, and how it really kind of prompted her to think about, am I prepared? No, I'm not prepared. There's things I need to do and things I need to say, and then how easy it is to kind of come away from a situation like that, and then you kind of rest back and you think, oh, okay, well, that happened, but that wasn't really it, and I have more time, and I still need to do these things, but I have time, right? And so, interestingly, in the Buddhist teachings, they say that even the most senior practitioners, people who've been practicing for many, many, many years, will take this very seriously and will, it's an indicator. We assess, where are we at in this, right? Like, I know in my own life how I come and go from this realization, and really looking at that and reminding ourselves, and are we ready? What are the benefits of it? And that's what these contemplations help us to do from a dharmic perspective. They help us to really think, wow, it really can happen. And we can push it away. We say, oh, that's too weird. I'm not going to do that. That's uncomfortable. And maybe it is uncomfortable, right? It probably is. But what happens is you get into these situations where there you are all of a sudden, and right, so it affects how prepared you are, the state of your mind. Will it be like a, oh no, shit, oh my God, right? Is that the reaction? Or
I felt like,
yeah.
Oh man, I don't want to go that way.
Exactly. So from the Buddhist perspective, so there are living beings who, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they have studied the science of mind for thousands of years. And there are practitioners who do meditations that literally are identical to the dissolution process at the time of death. They're literally practicing for death all the time through their meditations, right? And what we've learned from these great beings is that the state of mind at the time of death has a dramatic influence on what happens next. Has a dramatic influence on what happens in the bardo, has a dramatic influence of whether you even go to the bardo or you go to, someplace else. It has a dramatic influence on the kind of life you're going to find yourself in next time around. And we know that if we can die at peace in our mind and well prepared, that we're going to have a much different experience than if we die with a lot of fear, agitation, resistance, tension. That's going to propel us into a new life where the karma related to that is going to manifest. So again, you can see why I care so much about this topic, because it's so important. And we can't, if we don't do this work all along, there's no way we can be faced at that moment with a calm mind. People talk about their life flashing before them, what are the regrets? All that comes up then. It has to, because you're trying to make sense of this life. We're here for a reason. And so at the end of the life, we're trying to make sense of, did we do what we came here to do? Yes, So very, very important. I really appreciate you sharing that. Something totally invisible can, a parasite, a virus. We don't know where we're going to catch it, when. A clot in our brain, aneurysm. My mother had an aneurysm and she died, and I was 13 years old, and then she had a near-death experience and came back to life. So she was really lucky, but she could have died. She did die. So we need to practice Dharma now before death comes. Okay? And then the third primary thought in the 9-point death meditation has to do with the idea that only Dharma can benefit us. The Dharma is the teachings of the Buddha and the teachings of spiritual awakening. I mean, whether you're Buddhist or not, the teachings that will help you to awaken and help you to cultivate virtue. Money and things won't help us. Wealth doesn't help. Wealthy people die. Many of them die with unbelievably mental torment, sometimes grasping at their possessions. I've seen people who their end-of-life process was consumed with anger and agitation about what their children were going to do with their estate. Not a good way to die. Friends and family can't help us. They can say prayers, but they can't prevent it from happening. And they're likely going to be very distressed by our passing. And if our relationships with them aren't healed or don't have a loving tone, or if there's a lot of grasping, that's likely to disturb our mind while we're dying as well, because they're going to be upset. So, all the comforts of our life, our nice home, our good friends, wealth, none of that, all the things we pursue, none of that can help us at the time of death. So, since nothing else can help us, we find the resolve to devote ourselves really to what will help us prepare. Mm-hmm.
Ginny, I'm thinking that most of us are very attached to life and somewhat disassociated with death. Mm-hmm. But I think there are some people in our in the West who are maybe struggling with whether death should be more welcome in their lives. Mm-hmm. That they're a little bit confused about, or may not have mental health, or may be confused about whether death is a good thing or a bad thing for them at the time. So can you make a comment about these concepts and meditations in respect to those people who might really be struggling with or feeling unclear about that particular subject? I'm thinking in particular people who might be suicidal or have a strong mental illness or things like that.
Well, I mean, the whole... So death is a doorway to another life, right? And a lot of people think this life is so hellish, I don't want to be here anymore, so I'll just end my life and hope for something better. But if we understand that it's really just a doorway, and if we end what we're experiencing here without actually working through it and healing it, we're going to have a very similar experience next time, probably even worse. So it's not like a solution, and so I don't know if that's answering the question, or maybe you want to comment on what you might like to share about this.
I was just thinking that it somehow became important to me at some point that we make the distinction, or that the distinction be really clear, that this is not about death. Like, you should not want death to happen today.
Right.
That this isn't the point of these meditations, because you want as much, I think from our perspective, we want as much time as possible in this life to resolve a lot of issues that are going on. So if we're struggling with difficulty and pain in this lifetime, this meditation is not about thinking about the end so we can get on with another good life. This meditation is about recognizing that we have a very short, in my perspective, recognizing we have a very short period of time to actually make improvements here and to encourage us to do the most with it, rather than thinking about escaping it.
Right, right, yeah. Good. Did you have a comment?
It makes me think of something that Rinpoche said to us, and that's to not call death to us. We're not gonna, as we age or whatever, if we're in pain, it's not about calling death to us. It's about being alive. Yeah.
Right, being more alive. Yeah. Yeah, and the whole purpose of these contemplations is to make life more meaningful and help us make better use of the time we have so that we don't waste our time here. And yeah, and all the things that happen to us, the challenges we face in life, for many people it can be overwhelming. But those very challenges are like what we're here to work through. And people do. They can work through certain challenges, and then it's like how wonderful that is. So rather than, things get really hard and we just quit, to have the opportunity to actually stick with it, figure out how to move through it more skillfully, gets us to the other side of that. So it actually it doesn't arise again. Rinpoche has said you get energetic closure on particular modules of your learning in this life, and that's what we want to do, and that the Dharma can help us to do that because it helps us to become more skillful.
It reminds me that several great Buddhist teachers have said, there's nothing so terrible it can't be purified. Or there's nothing so terrible that you can't actually shift or change the situation at some point.
Right, yeah. And so there's Buddhist practices, purification practices, where you actually can purify karma and those kinds of things, and and that's another whole topic of the myriad ways of practicing Dharma that can help us transform our lives, transform our mind, and that's what these series are about. Yeah.
You called this a 9-point meditation, and then listed 3 points to contemplate.
Yeah.
How do we get to 9?
So for death is certain, there's 3 elements, and I kind of was just talking about every living being dies. There's no escape. Every moment brings you closer to death. I don't have the specific. Sorry.
It is in the Lamrim too.
Yeah.
The section on impermanence that has this meditation.
More detail in the Lamrim.
And it's on our YouTube channel. I think you did the 9-point death meditation.
Yeah.
Last year you taught.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't. I was trying to just highlight some basic points under each one, but yeah. So any other questions or comments? Okay, so just a final few thoughts about living with the end in mind and thinking about, preparing for our own death in a way. So one is this, gaining this authentic realization of impermanence, leading a genuinely spiritual life. The poet Kabir said, "What is found then is found now." So I have had this insight that so many people want to die in peace. They want to die peacefully, but that's really difficult to do if you aren't living that way, if you aren't living in a way that will support that. So it's really unrealistic for a lot of people, a lot of healthcare providers. They're trying to help everyone die in peace, but a lot about how you die depends on how you live. And so this is where our daily practices, and when we understand these issues more deeply, and we change how we relate to others, and we change where we place our focus and what we cultivate, all that determines how we're going to die. So that's very important. So developing positive habits. His Holiness says if one cultivates spiritual qualities such as mental harmony, humility, non-attachment, patience, love, and compassion, then one becomes equipped with the strength and intelligence able to deal effectively with the problems of this life. And because the wealth one is amassing is mental rather than material, it will not have to be left behind. There is no need to enter the after-death state empty-handed. And the great spiritual masters of Tibetan Buddhism say that the best habit to cultivate is to grow compassion, bodhicitta. So don't miss next month. The good heart. It purifies negative karma. It accumulates positive karma. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that dying with bodhicitta is the best way to die. The other thing, did you have a comment?
I was wondering what the Buddhist point of view is towards an earlier death, maybe as a result of not wanting to have extreme suffering. You know, people who die because they have Alzheimer's, not Alzheimer's, but could be, or Lou Gehrig's disease or something. What is our stand on that?
How do you mean? Do you mean people
Mercy killing.
who choose to end their life early?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't think that we could say what the Buddhist view would be on that for certain. And I think that, His Holiness, when people have posed questions to him, he's very, cautious about ever stating, well, this is right and this is wrong, right? That all of us are making decisions based on a situation and what's happening in that situation. And I think for us personally, we would need to grapple with decisions about that in our own lives and whether, it, and I don't think that it's ever something that, would be, I've never seen anything in the Buddhist literature that would say this is right or wrong. I don't think it's put forth that way. So it's there are many elements to thinking about that. Many people, I've known Buddhists who believe that through their suffering they're purifying karma. Some use that suffering as an opportunity to practice a compassion practice and taking on the suffering of others. So much depends on the individual and what their beliefs are and how they make sense and meaning of that. And we just don't kind of get into saying to people this is right or wrong. So it's a very personal. But I
think it's reasonable to share, though, that Rinpoche has encouraged us to consider that too much pain at the end of life is often difficult. And so I think as in general, she's opened the door to considering the management of pain.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a different issue than what she's asking.
Issue,
yeah.
But you did mention some people choose to experience or look at the pain as purification, and there's some precedent about being able to manage. It's reasonable to manage pain.
Yeah, good. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is that that becomes really important as a spiritual practice is learning to let go. And the practice of generosity, I've known people who they begin, because they have this awareness that death can come at any time, they're not so grasping with their possessions, and they're willing to let them go and rejoice in cleaning out the house and making those preparations, right? So that can be a really wonderful thing. And really, at the end of life, you have to let go. And the people who really suffer are the ones who are trying to hold on and control. And so the practice of generosity, Joan Halifax says that generosity sets patterns in the heart and mind that can carry us into a peaceful death as we let go of the body and the mind and the experience of dying. So practicing that letting go can be really helpful. And then the mending of relationships. So we can ask ourselves, do I need to ask someone's forgiveness? Do I need to forgive someone? Am I holding any grudges? If I were to die tomorrow, or if that person were to die tomorrow, would I regret not having said what needs to be said? So that's, just something we can contemplate. So we're almost out of time, and I'm just going to conclude with a couple of quotes that are relevant to the topic. The first one's by Sogyal Rinpoche. He kind of summarizes this teaching really nicely. He said, "The teachings show us what will happen if we prepare for death, and what will happen if we do not. The choice could not be clearer. If we refuse to accept death now, while we are still alive, we will pay dearly throughout our lives, at the moment of death or thereafter. The effects of this refusal will ravage this life and all the lives to come. We will not be able to live our lives fully. We will remain imprisoned in the very aspect of ourselves that has to die. This ignorance will rob us of the basis of the journey to enlightenment and trap us endlessly in the realm of illusion." And Muriel Sparks said, "If I had my life to live over again, I should form the habit of nightly composing myself to thoughts of death. I would practice, as it were, the remembrance of death. There is no other practice which so intensifies life. Death, when it approaches, ought not to take one by surprise. It should be part of the full expectancy of life. Without an ever-present sense of death, life is insipid." So, I'd like to thank you all for coming today and invite you to join me in dedication. May my capacity for compassion be infinite. I dedicate these efforts to complete and total enlightenment, so that I may be of benefit to all sentient beings. May it be so. So if anything from this teaching today was of benefit, I give thanks to my kind teacher and the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and anything that may not have been correct, I take full responsibility for. So thank you for coming. And feel free to stay and have a cup of tea and visit.